from the recovery vessel. That is an operation that I have a lot of respect and admiration for, that individual that does that.
So again, Dragon continuing to get closer and closer to the recovery vessel, Megan. You see some of those ropes now coming into view as well. If you are just joining us, Crew-9 Splashdown off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time with NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Butch Wilmore, Sunny Williams, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. They're now working through procedures to hoist the spacecraft up onto the recovery vessel Megan.
We just saw that hydraulic arm get lowered into the lifting position. That arm will be the mechanism that is utilized to lift Dragon up and out of the water and into the nest located there at the aft end of the recovery vessel.
And the recovery vessel being used today is, as we mentioned multiple times, is named Megan, but that's actually after NASA astronaut Megan McArthur, who flew on Crew-2 a couple of years ago. We're getting some views now from actually inside the boat.
Yeah, you're exactly right. This view is straight down the recovery vessel. That platform that was closest to the camera, that is the egress platform.
Freedom. Rigging is almost complete. Approximately 5 minutes until capsule lift.
Great news there from SpaceX Core. So about 5 minutes left until we see Dragon Freedom get lifted out of the water. That hydraulic arm, as I said before, is the mechanism that will lift it. It's quite swift, actually, the whole process of getting the spacecraft.
Brace for capsule lift.
Bracing.
There it goes, Dragon Freedom being lifted out of the water and onto our recovery vessel, Megan.
So once securely on...
Welcome aboard the recovery vessel. Recovery personnel are completing final checks and stand by for translation to the egress platform.
Freedom copies.
Great news there, letting us know that Dragon Freedom has been successfully recovered from the water's surface. If you've just joined us, we had an on-time splashdown at 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time, and we can now see that the water recovery operations are continuing to progress. The nest where the Dragon spacecraft is located is going to get moved forward. This will happen after one of the recovery crew members does some checks, and we'll also see some hosing. Obviously, the spacecraft splashed down in salt water. Salt water is corrosive, and we want to try and rinse out as much of the salt water as possible to reduce that corrosion on the metallic structures. So we can see some guidance there being provided, really steering the spacecraft properly into the Dragon's nest.
And it's been 30 minutes since Dragon splashed down, and as you can see there, the spacecraft is already on board the recovery vessel Megan. Things continuing to move very smoothly today throughout the entire operations from the deorbit burn up until this point as well.
And Freedom, it looks like the positioning wasn't quite right, so they are working on repositioning the capsule in the nest now.
Okay, copy that. Thanks.
And with that, the team is just going to adjust the Dragon spacecraft a bit so that it's in the right position ahead of translating up a little bit closer ahead of the side hatch. So the team is now going to step through the procedures to ensure that that takes place.
While Dragon does fly itself autonomously, it clearly is unable to park itself autonomously. We want to make sure that the Dragon capsule is properly seated there in that nest. Once Dragon is fully seated in the nest, we'll probably see a bunch of that salt water come out from the bucket there located underneath the side hatch. See some salt water splash out. As I mentioned before, one of the recovery team members will begin hosing down the exterior of the spacecraft.
So you are continuing to get some great live views on your screen of Crew-9, which includes NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Sunny Williams, Butch Wilmore, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov, who splashed down off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida, 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon. Now working to get that spacecraft situated in the nest. Just making some final adjustments and tweaks to ensure that it's nice and secure.
Once the spacecraft is seated and secured and oriented correctly in the nest, Dragon will be moved into the hangar located underneath that helipad that we saw earlier from the aerial views during recovery.
All right, Freedom, looks like you are settled into the nest now. Team is working through hypergol sweeps.
Copy all.
Call out there telling us that the recovery team is doing the second round of those hypergolic sweeps. This helps ensure that everyone, all the recovery team members that are located basically right where this camera is located on, towards the forward end of the recovery vessel, that they will all be safe once the spacecraft is translated forward. So we're just doing some additional steps to make sure that the hypergolic propellant that is utilized for maneuvering the Dragon capsule while on orbit, making sure that none of those vapors are still present on the exterior of the capsule.
That's right, and there are a variety of individuals on board the boat that help with recovery operations. Not only do we have the recovery personnel that you see here, but we also have a doctor that will check out the crew members as standard procedure. As with any spacecraft that is returning from space, we always perform a medical check with the crew. So you will see the crew come out of the capsule and be placed on stretchers, just like with the Soyuz landing and with all of our Dragon splashdowns. That is the nominal procedure. We'll stand by to see Dragon Freedom translate or scooch up a little bit closer to the camera angle that we're seeing right here. And then teams will step through procedures to get that side hatch opened. You see it right in the dead center of your screen there. It's kind of that rectangular shape. It has not been opened since Crew-9, which included Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbanov, launched back in September from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. So that will be the very first time that hatch is opened. Once docked to the International Space Station, crew enter through the top hatch, which was where the nose cone is now closed. That's the hatch that they actually utilize to go ahead and get inside the International Space Station. So as we get a little closer to that hatch opening procedure, you might start to see more individuals come into frame for some of that support. The ship has a maximum capacity of a little over 40 people on board, and it takes a variety of different roles, as we've discussed, to support. Also on board is the chief of the astronaut office for NASA, that's Joe Acaba.
Now, while we are standing by for translation of the Dragon spacecraft to the platform there, the recovery platform that we see in the foreground, it is important to note that Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander will be getting. We can see the crew there using their restraints as resting places for their arms. They were just in space moments ago, so their arms were able to float freely.
400 meters.
This is a gorgeous bluebird day here that we have for the splashdown of Crew-9. It's incredible to think that the Dragon capsule just minutes ago was going over 17,000 miles per hour, and now gently coasting to a soft splashdown.
200.
Copy, 200 meters. Brace for splashdown.
As you can see there on your screen, continuing to monitor progress of the Dragon spacecraft. And we're going to stand by for splashdown, located in the Gulf of America, off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida.
And splashdown. Crew-9 back on Earth.
And SpaceX Freedom, splashdown. Good main release.
Copy, splashdown. We see main chutes cut. Nick, Alex, Butch, Sunny, on behalf of SpaceX, welcome home.
It is an amazing, what a ride. I see a capsule full of grins ear to ear.
And as you can see on your screen, we have visual confirmation of splashdown. Dragon Freedom has returned home, and NASA astronauts.
System safety verifications are in progress. We'll report back when recovery personnel are en route.
Understand. And, we're in section 2, 4.800 landing response. And looking for your words if it is necessary.
In the distance, we can see the recovery vessel making its way.
Copy, you're in section 2 for the environmental assessment in 4.800. That is not necessary today.
Understand. Raise and buzz.
So we will continue to have communications between the Corps and Nick Hague, the commander of Crew Dragon Freedom, which just splashed down 2 minutes ago off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. Dragon Freedom has returned home with NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Sunny Williams, Butch Wilmore, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. They're back on Earth after approximately 17 hours of a return journey from space.
The SpaceX recovery ship and team have been waiting for Dragon's splashdown, and they will now make their way to the splashdown location. The teams have been ready and waiting about 3 nautical miles away, so it's going to take them about 30 minutes or so to make their way
and
to
SpaceX Freedom. Pretty sure we're in stable 1.
Copy, stable 1. We see the same.
going to take about 30 minutes for the recovery team to make their way over to Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander, who are still seated and secured inside that Dragon spacecraft there on your screen. Incredible views there of that thermal protection system, or TPS. That Dragon capsule was pristine, white color before it departed the station, and we can see how the reentry phase, the thermal protection system did its job. Now, if you're wondering what that hole, that like bucket area is, that is underneath the side hatch. That is where the main parachutes were stored. So when we saw the Dragon capsule docked at station, it looked very different. The panel that protects and covers the main parachutes, that was still intact, as well as the panels that enclose where the drogue parachutes are located. We can see those fast boats.
SpaceX is go for recovery personnel to approach. Expect personnel alongside in the next few minutes.
Freedom copies.
We can see those fast boats. We weren't kidding when we said they were fast. While it does take about 30 minutes for the main recovery vessel to make its way over to the capsule, these fast boats will be doing a couple of things simultaneously. A couple of them are going to be working to retrieve the parachutes that you see in the background there of this drone shot. Those parachutes will be retrieved from the ocean surface. We want to make sure we are able to pull those out. The recovery vessel there closest to the spacecraft is going to be performing some safety checks. We can see there they're using an instrument that is basically working to detect if there are any hypergolic vapors or fumes that are still residing in and or around the Draco thruster nozzles or outlets. The hypergolic fuel, which is necessary for on-orbit burns to maneuver the spacecraft. Unfortunately, those hypergolics are unable to be breathed. They are toxic, and so this team here is doing those initial safety checks to make sure that it is safe for the rest of the recovery team to approach the spacecraft. They're also checking to make sure that any residuals from the pyros are safe and are not going to cause any issues. We can see the team working their way around the spacecraft to do these these sniff tests on all of those Draco thrusters.
And as we continue to await the recovery of our Dragon spacecraft with NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Sunny Williams, Butch Wilmore, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov inside, Dragon has autonomously completed several steps to safe itself following splashdown. We are continuing to see Dragon in what is known as Stable 1 configuration. That's kind of the ideal configuration following Pacific time. The crew is now on board the recovery vessel Megan, and the hatch is open. The next major milestone that we'll see is when the crew will actually egress or exit the spacecraft. But before that, they'll continue to, the recovery personnel will continue to install that protective area around the hatch and then remove the footrests. So we're a couple minutes away from seeing the crew egress, but not too long away.
We'll probably see those footrests being handed out here in the near future, as I mentioned before. Oh, of course, we got to get a well-documented photo of the moment. Although we can't see it from here, I'm pretty sure there are 4 smiles on board right now.
And we did hear that report out from the commander, Nick Hague, following splashdown, that there were four smiles as far as he could see.
Yeah, capsule full of grins. Now, generally speaking...
And there we do see Crew-9, some happy waves, smiles all around back on Earth.
Generally speaking, we have the individuals in the 2 center seats of the spacecraft exit first. You might hear us refer to this as the exit process as egress. It's just another term for exiting the spacecraft. Generally speaking, we most of the time have the two center seats egress first, as it makes moving around inside the capsule a little bit easier. We can see the tablets that were previously located on the upper leg of the crew members. We can see those being handed out to the recovery team. Those were taken off prior to the entry phase, to spacecraft reentry. Those had to be stored and secured prior to dynamic operations.
It looks like we are starting to see the footrests also be removed. I just saw one there on the screen. There are 4, of course, one for each crew member.
Those footrests are made out of carbon fiber and are actually sized appropriately for each crew member, as everybody has different measurements and different leg lengths. Same goes for the armrests and the bucket length of each seat. We size those appropriately for the crew members and to ensure their comfort and safety. I believe we just saw the little ramp that is used to help slide the crew members out from inside the spacecraft.
And once the crew does exit Dragon Freedom, they will be placed on to a stretcher to go to a medical bay for medical checkouts. This is standard procedure for all Dragon spacecraft flights that Splashdown crewed, as well as for our Soyuz spacecraft that land in Kazakhstan.
We could see the exterior of Dragon Freedom quite clearly in this shot, and it's such a beautiful sight. I personally prefer the capsule when it has some of that charring from atmospheric reentry. It is the signature sign of a capsule that has returned to Earth.
Continuing to stand by for our first crew member to egress or exit for Dragon Freedom following their splashdown at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time. Dragon undocked from the International Space Station at 10:05 p.m. Pacific just yesterday, so it was about 17 hours of phasing. And while on board the International Space Station, Crew-9 contributed to 900 hours of science, over 150 research experiments and investigations, making great use of the microgravity lab of the International Space Station, which celebrates 25 years of continuous human presence this November.
Looks like we're about to get our first crew member here upon egress of the Dragon spacecraft.
So we are standing by for that egress. Outside of Dragon, you do see one of those stretchers. This is the expected procedure, as the crew will be taken to medical facilities following their exit from Dragon.
We can see folks on board clapping as our first crew member.
And that is NASA astronaut Nick Hague, commander of Crew-9, now out of Crew Dragon Freedom. Some smiles, thumbs up, and a wave. Can't get any better than that.
Yeah, that is one happy camper, that's for sure. As we said before, it is standard procedure for all of our long-duration crew members to receive assistance upon egressing from the spacecraft. We basically help them move off of the recovery deck and into the private medical quarters for their initial consultation with the SpaceX flight surgeon. So we'll see that take place for all 4 of our crew members today.
And we are standing by for the next crew member to exit Freedom. Next up, out of the capsule, we expect Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. His first space flight. Spent 171 days in space alongside NASA astronaut Nick Hague.
Looks like we're getting some cheers and clapping on board as Alexander is slid down the little ramp and placed into the mobility aid. Once again, big smile.
Now, the 2 crew members remaining in Dragon are NASA astronauts Sunny Williams and Butch Wilmore. They completed 286 days in space.
One of the remaining footrests being removed from the Dragon spacecraft. As I said before, we generally try to have the crew members that are located in the 2 center seats aboard Dragon, and we like to have them egress first if possible, as it creates a little bit more movable working room inside the spacecraft. There is a recovery crew member inside that is helping all of our Crew-9 crew egress or exit from the spacecraft.
We are standing by for the next crew member to egress or exit Crew Dragon Freedom following the splashdown not even an hour ago at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time. Really have the recovery operations down pretty quick at this point.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to think that, just 5 years ago when we were doing the initial demonstration missions of the Dragon for Crew Dragon, that now we're under about 30 minutes for, to retrieve the spacecraft from the water, and just several minutes here while it's been on board, and to get everyone, really to get that side hatch open. For those of you that have just recently joined, the Dragon had an on-time splashdown. It looks like we're getting our next crew member here. That is none other than Sunny Williams. Big smile, big waves. She, like her other crew members, now will be assisted onto the mobility aid.
There we have it, some waves, some thumbs up, and some smiles.
Definitely seems to be a theme among all recovery operations.
Absolutely. And of course, that leaves NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore inside Dragon in seat 4. We're getting some views of him now as he egresses or exits the spacecraft.
Once again, some elation and cheers there from Butch Wilmore. As we mentioned before, returning to Earth coming from a microgravity environment can wreak havoc on the body. So it is customary and just standard procedure for all of our long-term space residents to get assistance once they are back on board the recovery vessel.
Well, now that Nick, Butch, Sunny, and Alexander are safely back home on Earth and getting checked out by the NASA medical team, we're going to wrap up our live coverage of their return. The Crew-9 mission began a little differently than usual since Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams were already aboard the space station when Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbunoff arrived on the Crew-9 spacecraft in September. Having arrived as the crew flight test crew for Starliner, Wilmore and Williams were fully incorporated into the space station's Expedition 72 team and began research and other work aboard the station along with the other crew members. Williams commanded the orbiting laboratory for much of the expedition. After a successful liftoff and separation from Falcon 9, Nick and Alexander made a short flight on board Dragon to the International Space Station. Veterans of long-duration space station missions, both Williams and Wilmore conducted spacewalks during their 9 months in space. Like all crews on the station, Crew-9 had the ability to leave at any point had there been an emergency. With their full-duration mission coming to an end, the crew began packing up their personal items for their return to Earth about a week ago and worked through tasks and shared lessons learned with Crew-10 teams as they arrived a few days ago.
Their journey home began about 17 hours ago when they closed the forward hatch to Dragon and undocked from the space station at 10:05 p.m. Pacific, 1:05 a.m. Eastern. After 4 successful departure burns and a phasing burn to line up their orbit, Nick, Butch, Sunny, and Alexander rested for a few hours before waking up to prepare for re-entry this morning. We jettisoned Dragon's trunk and performed our final on-orbit maneuver, the approximately 7.5-minute-long deorbit burn, and that occurred at 2:11 p.m. Pacific, 5:11 p.m. Eastern Time. And that sent Dragon on its path home. The spacecraft re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and slowed its descent with successful deployments of 2 drogue parachutes and 4 main parachutes, with the final splashdown occurring off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida at 2:57 p.m. Pacific, 5:57 p.m. Eastern. Following that successful splashdown, we saw SpaceX recovery experts move in and prepare Dragon Freedom for its lift onto the recovery vessel. And just a little less than an hour following splashdown, we saw Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander make their way out of Dragon and into the recovery ship's medical facilities, safe and sound.
Next up, they'll catch a helicopter flight back to shore, where they'll transfer to aircraft that will take them home. The astronauts will take a NASA plane for the short flight back to Houston, where they'll be reunited with family and friends to bring an end to this mission. It's been an honor and a privilege to share their journey with all of you as we continue this new era in human spaceflight.
Return today marks the end of the direct handover we executed after successfully launching the Crew-10 mission to the space station just last week on Friday, March 14th. Thank you, as always, for joining us for tonight's coverage of the splashdown of Crew-9. Remember to follow SpaceX on X and NASA online and on social media for updates for the very latest on crew and cargo flights to and from the International Space Station.
And we'll continue to share the progress of Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander on social media as they travel back home. We do also have a post-splashdown media briefing coming up at approximately 4:30 p.m. Pacific, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, where leadership will share a final update as we conclude this successful mission. So, from all of us at NASA and SpaceX, welcome home, Crew-9. So long.
views during recovery.
All right, Freedom, looks like you are settled into the nest now. Team is working through hypergol sweeps.
Copy all.
Call out there telling us that the recovery team is doing the second round of those hypergolic sweeps. This helps ensure that everyone, all the recovery team members that are located basically right where this camera is located on, towards the forward end of the recovery vessel, that they will all be safe once the spacecraft is translated forward. So we're just doing some additional steps to make sure that the hypergolic propellant that is utilized for maneuvering the Dragon capsule while on orbit, making sure that none of those vapors are still present on the exterior of the capsule.
That's right. And there are a variety of individuals on board the boat that help with recovery operations. Not only do we have the recovery personnel that you see here, but we also have a doctor that will check out the crew members as standard procedure. As with any spacecraft that is returning from space, we always perform a medical check with the crew. So you will see the crew come out of the capsule and be placed on stretchers, just like with the Soyuz landing and with all of our Dragon splashdowns. That is the nominal procedure. We'll stand by to see Dragon Freedom translate or scooch up a little bit closer to the camera angle that we're seeing right here. And then teams will step through procedures to get that side hatch opened. You see it right in the dead center of your screen there. It's kind of that rectangular shape. It has not been opened since Crew-9, which included Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbanov, launched back in September from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. So that will be the very first time that hatch is opened. Once docked to the International Space Station, crew enter through the top hatch, which was where the nose cone is now closed. That's the hatch that they actually utilize to go ahead and get inside the International Space Station.
Stationed a couple miles away from the splashdown site. We can see the crew there using their restraints as resting places for their arms. They were just in space moments ago, so their arms were able to float freely.
400 meters.
This is a gorgeous bluebird day here that we have for the splashdown of Crew-9. It's incredible to think that the Dragon capsule just minutes ago was going over 17,000 miles per hour, and now gently coasting to a soft splashdown.
200.
Copy, 200 meters. Brace for splashdown.
As you can see there on your screen, continuing to monitor progress of the Dragon spacecraft. And we're going to stand by for splashdown, located in the Gulf of America, off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida.
And splashdown, Crew-9 back on Earth.
And SpaceX Freedom, splashdown. Good main release.
Copy, splashdown. We see main chutes cut. Nick, Alex, Butch, Sunny, on behalf of SpaceX, welcome home.
It is an amazing, what a ride. I see a capsule full of
Way.
For the crew members and to ensure being removed from the then Sunny Williams. Big smile, big waves. And cheers there from Butch Wilmore. As we mentioned before, returning to Earth from coming from a microgravity environment, can stationed a couple. That's a
way. Hours of phasing.
Initial consultation with the space crew members that are located in the once again, some elation and cheers there from Butch Wilmore. As we mentioned before, returning to Earth from coming from a microgravity environment can wreak havoc on the body. So it is customary and just standard procedure for all of our long-term space residents to get assistance once they are back on board the recovery. Stationed a couple miles away from the Splashdown site. We can see the crew there using their restraints as resting places for their arms. They were just in space moments ago, so their arms were able to float freely.
400 meters.
This is a gorgeous bluebird day here that we have for the splashdown of Crew-9. It's incredible to think that the Dragon capsule just minutes ago was going over 17,000 miles per hour, and now gently coasting to a soft splashdown.
200.
Copy, 200 meters. Brace for splashdown.
As you can see there on your screen, continuing to monitor progress of the Dragon spacecraft. And we're going to stand by for splashdown, located in the Gulf of America, off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida.
And splashdown. Crew-9 back on Earth.
And SpaceX Freedom, splashdown. Good main release.
Copy, splashdown. We see main chutes cut. Nick, Alex,